We know you have a lot of ways you could be spending your time, and it means so much to us that you're here for Castle Hills Christian Church, online church. We encourage everyone to minimize distractions, to grab a Bible, and to prepare your heart and mind to worship, learn, and fellowship together online. Later in the service, we'll be taking communion together, so we encourage you to grab some bread and some juice to prepare for that later on in the service. We're asking everyone to fill out a connection card at chccsa.info. There you'll find all kinds of other information about our church. We'd love to connect with you at chccsa.info. Let's worship together.
We worship the God who is. We worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors. He parted the raging sea. My God, He holds the victory. Yeah. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. Shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in His place, and we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. Oh, oh, oh. We shout out your praise. Oh, oh, oh. We sing to the God who heals. We sing to the God who saves. We sing to the God who always makes a way. 'Cause He hung up on that cross and He rose up from that grave. My God, still rolling stones away. We're singing, there's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in His place, and we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, and now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace, and let the house of the Lord sing praise. Yes. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace, and let the house of the Lord sing praise. Sing it. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today, and we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place, and we won't be quiet. We're gonna shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today, and we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in His place, and we won't be quiet. We're gonna shout out your praise. Oh, oh, oh. We shout out your praise. There is joy in this house today. Hey. We shout out your praise. Oh, oh, oh. We shout out your praise. heaven thundered, and the world was born. Life begins and ends in the dust you formed. Faith commanded, and the mountains moved. Fear is losing ground to our hope in you. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Freedom conquered, all our chains undone. Sin defeated, Jesus has overcome. Mercy triumphed when the third day dawned. Darkness was denied when the stone was gone. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on and on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done.
Despite being more technologically connected than ever, loneliness has reached epidemic status in our society. The cure is nothing new, however. It is ancient wisdom set in motion from the beginning of creation. The solution? Friendship. Let's discover the lost art of friendship. I recently watched a documentary called Speed Cubers on Netflix, and it's about the competitive world of Rubik's Cube puzzle solving. And this documentary focuses on two of the competitors, Felix Zemdegs and Max Park. Now, Felix had held at one point in time almost all of the world records in competitive Rubik's Cube puzzle solving. And when we're first introduced to Max, we find out that he has autism, and that when he was younger, he really idolized and looked up to Felix and just was excited to be around him. And that was sort of his entryway into the world of competitive Rubik's Cube solving. Over time, Max begins to break many of Felix's records. And what's interesting to see in this documentary is that a pretty cool friendship develops instead of a bitter rivalry, like you might expect when someone comes up behind you and overtakes you and begins breaking all of your records. We're in this series called The Lost Art of Friendship. We've been focusing on Ecclesiastes chapter 4, and this is what it says in verse 4. And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envying of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. See, the more we are separated from the type of relationships we're supposed to have, the more lonely we are. And even though we don't realize it, we're missing out on some amazing things in life. We're committing ourselves to friendship less and less in our culture, and this is making us miserable. So what's the solution to our loneliness epidemic? Is it growing a larger circle of acquaintances? Is it better social media platforms? Is it more self-help books or motivational YouTube videos? It's none of these. The solution to our loneliness epidemic is ancient wisdom. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 7 through 12. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone who had neither son nor brother. There's no end to his toil, and yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity the one who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. See, this is how we're better together. Friendship is not contingent upon one another's ability to maintain and provide for the other. When we're involved in a meaningful relationship, we're not dependent on each other to fulfill our needs, but instead, we're dependent on God's infinite divine provision for each other and through each other. We've been working from this biblical definition of friendship. Friendship is choosing to show someone how valuable they are by sacrificing and caring for them in the way that Jesus does. Listen to the words of chapter 4, verses 9 and 10 again. Two are better than one because they have a good return, or as the NET translation says, they can reap more benefit for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other or the companion up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. See, we are living in a society where we're missing out on the companionship. But when we work together collaboratively, we actually have a better return for our efforts. There was a study done that said that individuals who work in collaborative settings are more than 50% more effective at completing tasks than those who are doing it independently. In addition, people who engaged in collaboration at work reported having higher levels of engagement, higher levels of success, and decreased levels of fatigue. Oftentimes, when we're working in environments around other people and there's this competition and there's this jealousy and envy and this climbing the corporate ladder, seeing who can shout the loudest, seeking out the most attention, these things create a tension between us and others, a competition that erodes cooperation. But what we see here in Ecclesiastes is that friends move from competitors to co-workers. We are better when we are working together, even when we don't expect it. Thinking of our relationships with each other as co-workers provides the opportunity for our friendship to grow in ways that are more important than reaching a specific bottom line. There's a great example of this in the Bible. The example of Aquila and Priscilla and the way they interact with Apollos in Acts chapter 18. And we see this working together here in this story. Apollos moves in their story from being the competition to being an ally. Acts chapter 18, verses 24 through 28. Now a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was an eloquent man, competent in the scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in the Spirit, he spoke and taught accurately concerning Jesus, though he knew only of the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogues, and when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. And when he wished to cross to Achaia, the brothers encouraged him and wrote to the disciples to welcome him. When he arrived, he greatly helped those who, through grace, had believed, for he powerfully refuted the Jews in public, showing by the scriptures that the Christ was Jesus. See, the way that Aquila and Priscilla handled this situation, when Apollos runs into their territory, onto their turf, allows the situation, the relationship to move from competition to being co-workers. They could have seen Apollos as the enemy or as the competition. He's intelligent, he's well-spoken, he's well-liked, and he comes to their area beginning to teach and preach and to gather a crowd. He's on their turf. So how is it that they were able to move in this relationship from being competitors to co-workers? Well, a couple of things we see. First, they pulled him aside privately. They didn't go to him in the public, in the synagogues where he was teaching. Instead, they pulled him aside and they began to have a conversation and a dialogue to build a relationship in private. We see it all the time that people want to confront on social media. They want to have performative criticism of others that centers on us instead of actually fixing anything in real life. It just signals to others who already agree with us so that we can get attention and show that we're superior. But that's not how Aquila and Priscilla handled this. They pulled Apollos aside quietly. The second thing they did is they invited him in, specifically to their home. This shows hospitality and vulnerability on their part, and it set the tone for what they wanted for each other. They wanted to be better together. See, we tend to want to have deeper associations with people who already agree with us. And here, instead, they are bringing someone in who they aren't quite on the same page as. This is something that Jesus modeled and something that we should be able to do if we're going to move people from competitors to co-workers. The next thing they did is they explained to him more adequately. They instructed him. The way they spoke to him could have brought more tension, could have been an argument that ensued. But instead of debating him, which probably would have been culturally acceptable, they weren't just interested in winning him, they were interested in engaging with him. They wanted something that was better. And the way we approach these kind of situations sets the foundation for what we're going to be able to accomplish in these relationships. Cooperation and co-working versus competition. And because of this, because of the way they approached him, the way they interacted with him, the way they welcomed him in, they were able to become cheerleaders for his success, specifically in the Gospels. We see in verse 27 that they sent him out. Outside of their mentorship, outside of their direction, outside of their authority, sent them out with the encouragement of the other believers. See, friends move from competition to cooperating co-workers. We know that life is better when we are working together with our friends. We know that when we are cooperating co-workers in friendships, we're more content and more joyful, whether we're winning or not. There is a mutual benefit to be had for sure. But the way that biblical friendship really sets itself apart is when we're enduring suffering on behalf of others. Friends also move from independence to interdependence. The Apostle Paul wrote this in Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. I think it's important to note that a few verses later, he says that we're supposed to each carry our own load. A burden is different than a load. A load is your responsibility, something you're in charge of, but a burden are the things that you cannot carry on your own. And we are supposed to be there for each other in a way that we can carry when someone else can't. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 10 through 11, our anchoring text says, "For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they will keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone?" I think our culture is obsessed with individualism. We believe wrongly that we are capable of doing everything we need to do on our own, and that when we do it by ourselves, we are superior to this. But there's a better way to move forward. There's a better way to move forward than trying to solve all the world's problems by ourselves, than trying to get everything done by ourselves, and to be strong, rugged individuals. And that is interdependence. And this is especially true when things go wrong. There's a great example of this in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 16, Paul and his companion Silas, who are partners in the gospel, traveling around, starting new churches, find themselves in a difficult situation. They end up arrested and in jail. We see in chapter 16 that Paul and Silas were stripped, beaten, severely flogged, thrown into jail, all because they healed a slave whose slave masters were making money off of her by making her tell fortunes. So this is where our story picks up. They've been arrested for this and they're in prison. In Acts 16:25, it says this: "About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's bonds were unfastened. And when the jailer woke and saw that the prison doors were open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, supposing that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul cried out in a loud voice, 'Do not harm yourself, for we are all here.' And the jailer called for the lights, and he rushed in, and trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and said, 'Sirs, what must we do to be saved?' And they said, 'Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you'll be saved, you and your household.' And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in the house. And he took them that same hour of the night and washed their wounds, and he was baptized at once, he and all his family. Then he brought them up into his house and set food before them. And he rejoiced along with his entire household that he believed in God." See, Paul and Silas here were arrested for caring for someone else's needs. They were so willing to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves that they were willing to go to jail for it. This girl had been exploited, which is a great representation for how the world uses relationships for personal gain. Now, notice how Paul and Silas responded to being imprisoned. I know what I would do. I'd be angry, I'd be throwing a fit, I'd be ready to get out of there. But instead, they're singing and praising God. We tend to think of Paul as this rugged individual, but that's not the case. Paul was always working with a team or in a group setting. Even most of his letters that we read in the New Testament had co-authors. In fact, the reason that Paul and Silas find themselves in this place in the first place is that Paul was looking for someone to join him in the work of starting new churches and sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ, along with Barnabas, who wouldn't bail on him when times got tough. Barnabas ended up going in a different direction with Mark, and that's a whole other story for another time. But Paul and Silas set out with the expectation that they would meet each other's needs and they would support each other when things got difficult, whether it meant rejoicing when times of rejoicing were called for or mourning when it was times for mourning. Instead of suffering alone, they found themselves worshiping together, praying, singing with one another. The way we support each other in times of suffering is a reflection of the continual support that God provides for us. Remember, friendship is not about us meeting each other's needs. Our needs are met by God already. It's us being there for each other, loving each other the way that God loves us. And even their response to being set free. They're concerned about the person who is responsible for their suffering. Paul and Silas were concerned. Their first concern was for the man who was the jailer, the one in charge of the suffering, the injustice that they were experiencing.
And as a result of their actions and their reaction to the situation, the jailer's entire family believed in Jesus and were baptized that night. See, people are quick to celebrate with us in good times. It's easy to find someone who will come over for a party or a free meal when things are going well. But being there when things are difficult, when times are bad, this is often neglected. When I think about friends being there for you in a difficult time, one of the moments that comes to my mind is the way I had some really good friends show up for me at my dad's funeral. Now, I wasn't expecting to have a lot of friends there, but two gentlemen that I know traveled down to come and just be there, not just at the funeral, but they just hung out. One of them brought an overnight bag and stayed overnight with me at my brother's house. They were there for me in a difficult time because everyone will face a difficult time at some point, and no one needs to suffer alone. The friends that reflect God's friendship with us the most are those who endure suffering with us together. At the beginning, I mentioned the story of Max Park and Felix Zemdegs. And what's interesting is when they needed each other the most, this friendship that they had built over Rubik's Cube solving came through for them. The World Championship was hosted in Felix's hometown of Melbourne, and Felix missed the podium on every event except for placing third in the 5x5. Max, on the other place, had placed first in the 7x7, the 6x6, the 5x5, the 4x4, and the one-handed. But in speed cubing, there's one event that really counts, and that's the 3x3 Rubik's Cube puzzle solving. And both Felix and Max underperformed at this event. And it was disappointing for them each in different ways. For Felix, this was one of his last opportunities, he felt like, and it was on his home turf, and he wanted to be there and participate, and he missed it. And for Max, each win mattered, and he suffers losses very difficultly. Max's family was worried about how he would handle the loss, but he took it well, and he talked to his friend about it. This is what Max said to Felix. He said, "No podiums makes us stronger." This is something that Felix had taught Max earlier on in their relationship and had encouraged him that the goals were not the point. It was the process and the things that they didn't achieve. Not having something, not having a win, not being on the podium was not going to define them. Instead, it would help make them stronger. There's a powerful quote at the end of the documentary from Max's dad. He said, "I don't think Felix knows how big of an impact he's had on Max's life." Our culture has lost the art of friendship, but when we seek out the ancient wisdom that we can be there for each other, we can work alongside of each other, and we can suffer together with each other. Through these processes, we can develop the kind of relationships that God wants for us and the kind of relationships that reflect the love of God to each other and to the world. One of the things we do each week is we take the Lord's Supper. When we do this, we remind ourselves that God is a relational being, that God loves us enough to not leave us alone, but instead to come and find us and be present with us, even in the midst of our weak moments, our broken moments, and our pain and suffering. And we remind ourselves that Jesus knows exactly what it means to hurt. We eat bread that reminds us that Jesus was flesh and blood human. We drink a cup that reminds us that he poured out his own blood as a sacrifice for us. And when we remember the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus, when we take the Lord's Supper together, we're doing it not just with God, but we're doing it with each other. And we're called to examine the way we relate to each other. So we're inviting you now to take the Lord's Supper.
I choose to worship. I choose you now. Though there's pain in the offering, I lay it down. And here in the conflict, when doubt surrounds, though my soul is unraveling, I choose you now. And I will praise you through the fire, through the storm, and through the flood. There is nothing that could ever steal my soul. In the valley, you are worthy. You are good when life is not. You will always and forever be my song. I build my altar right here and now. In the midst of the darkest night, it won't burn out. For you are perfect, no matter what. In the joy or the suffering, I sing it loud. So I will praise you through the fire, through the storm, and through the flood. There is nothing that could ever steal my soul. In the valley, you are worthy. You are good when life is not. You will always and forever be my song. When the enemy says I'm done, I lift my praises. When my world comes crashing down, I lift my praises high. Till the darkness turns to dawn, I lift my praises. Oh, I choose to worship. I choose you now. When the enemy says I'm done, I lift my praises. When my world comes crashing down, I lift my praises high. Till the darkness turns to dawn, I lift my praises. Oh, I choose to worship. I choose you now. Oh, I choose to worship. I choose you now. And I will praise you through the fire, through the storm, and through the flood. There is nothing that could ever steal my soul. In the valley, you are worthy. You are good when life is not. You will always and forever be my song. When the enemy says I'm done, I lift my praises. When my world comes crashing down, I lift my praises high. Till the darkness turns to dawn, I lift my praises. Oh, I choose to worship. I choose you now. Oh, I choose to worship you. I choose you now. Oh, I choose you now.
We're excited to know that some of you are ready to take some next steps in your faith journey. We want to come alongside you, support you, and equip you through this process. CHCCSA.info is your central hub for all next steps. If you want to submit a prayer request, talk to someone about getting baptized and giving your life to Jesus, or you're looking for a place to serve or a place to get connected to our church, CHCCSA.info is a great place to start for all these next steps. Some of you call Castle Hills Christian Church your home. And if that's you and you want to continue to partner with us financially as we serve both here in San Antonio and around the world, you can go to give.chccsa.com, or you can text the message GIVE to the number 210-903-5440. Thank you for your support. We're so glad that you're here today, and we hope to see you next week.